Okay, great. Call to order. This is the Newtown Township Finance Committee meeting for November 15th, 2023. Do a roll call. Mr. Fisher?
Yeah.
Mr. Stukas? Mr. Trotter?
Here.
Mr. Naples here. Do not see Ms. Pascal. Oh, okay, just go. Roll call. We need to do a moment of silence. And for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for God, indivisible, with liberty.
Next order is the agenda. I believe we have two missing pieces in the agenda. We have reports. And we also have new business. We need to make a modification of the agenda to reflect those two additions.
Do you have specific new business?
I do.
Oh, so let's be specific about it, what it is. We would need to vote that on. The reports I'm not as worried about because that's the reports are just a report.
Mhm.
But if you actually have a new business item that you want to take an action on, then we will handle that piece separately, amend the agenda, and then do the agenda.
Are we allowed to do that?
You are if the board takes an action to do it as it, and it's of some importance and they believe it needs to be handled today.
The item I was contemplating, correct me if I'm out of line, regarding new business for the next meeting is committee assignments for 2020.
Well, I think you would want to wait until your board is reset for 2024. You as a committee, because you don't know for sure who your new member will be.
Okay, so
you're going to
wait to 24.
You're going to want to
do it in anticipation.
I think it would be premature to do that because I don't know who the Board of Supervisors is going to appoint. I forget. I think it's Lisa is the one whose term is up.
That could be and I expect her to resign because of going on the school.
I actually think she's wanting to stay on, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
But what my point being is that until the board appoints who's going to be on your committee,
Oh, I got it.
I think you may not want to set your committee assignments for
Yeah, they need to
2024.
step first. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Wasn't sure.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, then,
But we can add reports because I can give you kind of a quick update,
that'll be fine.
but that, like I said, is not material, but.
Got it. Okay, next order of business then is,
You want to go ahead and do your agenda, approve your agenda.
all right, I got
With
it. I
adding
apologize.
reports.
I need a motion to consider approving the agenda for this meeting. Alex Sukas moved, Ed Napole second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next order of business is consider approving the minutes from the October 15th, 2023 meeting. I would need a motion to consider approving those. So moved. Second. I have an item on that. Whether or not we need to have as an attachment the recommendation that was made to the Board of Supervisors regarding the stormwater.
I believe it actually is an attachment on the agenda, or on the minutes, but I don't think it printed out, but let me verify that.
Okay,
But we will make note that it should be attached one way or the other.
got it. Based on that, do we have a motion to approve? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hear none, so motion passes. Steve, do you want to do, reports at this point?
We can.
Great.
So, I thought I would just take a moment. We've been doing a couple things, obviously, preparing for the 2024 budget, and looking at where we are, as the township. If you were here Monday night, and I know some of you from the committee were, I don't know how many from the public were. We're going to end the year in a very positive side. Again, I can look at that and tell you that there are really three main areas that are driving that. Permit fees came in way higher than we anticipated this year. And, you know, we, as we've talked, we set those aside for future year coverages. But the thing that I would talk to you about with that is that, you know, we've been talking, I think next year will probably be one of our years that we start experiencing a real decrease in permits in that. And so we budgeted accordingly. The other other three areas that came in that were pretty solid this year. One was we had a slight uptick in real estate tax collection that we hadn't counted on. The county has actually done a really good job of going back and doing some back collection. And so we picked up about $100,000 there. We've had a tremendous year in interest. We've been able to invest some of the township's money. And, you know, I guess there's good and bad when the interest rates are high, right? And right now we're experiencing one of the good. We've had about $170,000 more than what we budgeted in expectation there. And so we're excited about that for what that, you know, how that fills in the budget. The other area that's higher, we actually experienced some higher than planned on monies from the state, but most of that's passed through. When I say that, let me real quick explain what that is. When there's money that we get every year, there's called Fire Relief Fund, and that Fire Relief Fund, when it comes to us, we have 30 days to get it to the fire company. It's a requirement. I've never quite understood why it goes to us and then to the fire company, but that's how it works. And I think it's because in some municipalities, there's multiple fire companies. And so it gets split between multiple fire companies. And so they make it upon the township to take, or the municipality to take care of that. That was up about $40,000 this year, I think, than what we had budgeted. In addition, we got a little bit more money towards our pensions than what we had counted on. And so again, those are pass-throughs. They go right to those areas. And so we did that. The only other area that's up significantly, and I don't really count this one because I hate when this one's up, is because we have additional revenues due to the fact that we've had people who have found their cars hitting township assets. And so particularly, like, I don't know, for some reason this year, we've had a string of cars that have ran into traffic light poles. And those are like very expensive when people have to replace those. So we have our other financing sources is like up almost $100,000 because people keep running into. We've had three major, hold up fingers, three. We've had three major accidents where people have hit traffic standards that we've had to replace the entire standard this year.
That's kind of a pass-through too, isn't it?
It's a pass-through. So I don't really count it, but when we look at revenues, it's up.
Yeah.
Obviously, on the other side of that, those same expenses are up, except for they come out of
capital.
They would come out of capital, and we'll have to move that over to capital at the end of the year. Under the expense side, I would say pretty much we're on target. There are a couple areas that we're experiencing savings, and at this point that I would just make note of. One of the areas is, and I say that, and between now and the end of December, I may have regretted saying it. But we're anticipating saving between $30,000 and $40,000 this year alone in salt. Just because we had we had very little salt usage last year. So when we look at the fact that, when I look at the fact at the end of the year that I'm anticipating that there's about $150,000 difference between what we're proposing of what we spent versus what we budgeted, a very good portion of that is really in our salt budget. The couple other areas that we've had some significant savings, and this is partly just more management of our third parties, particularly our third-party inspectors. We have not spent as much as we thought we were going to spend there. I think we're actually going to spend it next year, a little bit of that. But we'll set the money aside for that purpose from this year's dollars, if that's what it looks like. And I'm working with Andy to do that. But the new stuff coming in next year, we think is going to be down. The other area that we didn't spend some money that we thought we were going to spend, or two areas, was the parks area. And there were some projects that we thought were going to happen this year that look like they're going to get pushed off to next year. And so we'll probably set those monies aside as well. There was also a $10,000 that we didn't spend in sorry, I'm having a brain dead moment really quickly. We didn't spend on recycling of electronics. Normally we do an electronic recycling event. We wanted to, but the two municipalities that we do it with, Marple and Springfield, both felt like, and we agreed. Last year we spent a lot of money on those recycling, and we had a pretty low turnout. And so I think it cost us 10. I think it cost Marple a little bit more and cost Springfield a little bit more. And so it was one of those things that we came back and said we were going to wait a year and do it next year. So that was one of those, things that when we went into the year, we thought we were going to do and we didn't. So we had several things like that. And that I think the other part of it is we are all very conservative in spending. We tend to not spend anything we just don't have to, which is good news for the public. But we budget based on what potentially could be spent if something happens. And so that's a challenge. So I know that came up on Monday night as to how do you know what's the right number to budget for salt, right? How do you know what's the right number to budget for some maintenance on roads, depending how many potholes you're going to have to fill. And the better we do our roads, the more we keep up with them, the less we're spending on that. And so we're adjusting those accordingly, but that's where we are. Any questions on my ramblings?
I got lots.
Yep.
The comment that we don't spend on things we don't have to, that's too bad. It really is too bad, because we don't have to spend on the plants, watering the plants that are up there, and those make our township nice. And you took them out of the budget for this next year.
No, I want to be clear what I took out. I took out the request. So the way we've handled the watering of the plants,
Volunteer.
we have our guys still cover the truck and do that, and then we had volunteers who were doing it, and that's what I took back out, was keeping the volunteers doing the actual watering.
All right, so that's an example of something where we don't have to spend the money.
Well, and that's not the example that I'm talking about here, but I hear what you're saying.
All right, fair enough. Also, this year we're going to end up $1 million plus on the plus side.
Yes.
So that's $1 million that we could have not taken from our residents and still had a balanced budget, right? Yes?
Correct.
Okay. And how many years in a row have we had a positive variance like?
Since I've been here, I think all but one.
All but one. So, why, to me, that seems like poor budgeting. If you do it once or twice and you come out with a positive variance, it's okay, we were managing, we came in close. But every year, that's $1 million. And then we sit here and we'll be talking about fees and stuff like that and say every dollar is important to our residents.
Mhm.
We don't want to charge them for anything. We don't have to, but now the answer is, well, it's going into a fund. It's, we're saving it for a rainy day. We're going to do projects down the road, but we don't do the projects, right?
But we are doing the projects, they're just not happening, like several of the projects that we planned this year, they've not happened because of things that have been outside of our control. We planned for them to do, like, we wanted the roof done on this building this year. And the engineer took longer to get the design done than we thought, so we didn't want to turn around and do it so late in the year. That's those kind of things.
I see. And all of the monies that we took out of the budget that you presented on Monday, it wasn't $1 million worth, but we know that next year, right? Because we're conservative and all that, we'll come out in the positive. But again, I expect. So why did we need to cut back on so many services and things for the township, the things that you took out of the budget, when we're in such a good financial spot? Either, why not budget better to, and I know a lot of this stuff is variable, but when it comes out every single year,
Yeah,
it's troubling. And let me just finish on one other part. This is probably the third time in a row where we've heard that that our revenues on the permit side, on that department, are way ahead of expenses. Again, I complained about it a while back, and here we are. Next year's the year. Oh, next year's the year. Everything's going to balance out. But why cut back on that department if we're going to have expenses in that department? And if we're not going to have expenses in that department, then it's turned into a revenue generating,
right, and that's not
which is not the purpose of it.
Yeah.
I'm totally confused on how what we're doing budget wise and why we are taking money from our residents that we don't need to.
I think that, this is probably when I went into this year and I talked with our developers ahead of time, what I think they're going to do. Most all of the permit fees this year, I really thought were going to be next year, that we are over. It's hard when a developer turns around and tells me, I'm not pulling the office, I'm not pulling the apartment, or not the apartment, the hotel until 2024, and then they pull it in September or June, whatever, I forget when they actually pulled the permits. I was told they were going to build half the houses that they were going to build, and they turned around and came in and built all the houses they were going to build, or pulled permits for almost all the houses. That's where I asked beforehand, and I probably am a little conservative on the side. I will admit that's my nature. If they say they're going to do this, I always pull back just a little bit in case they don't. The growth here has been such that, originally they told me they weren't going to do any of the retail until next year as well. And they turned around and pulled that early because people change their opinions and change where it is. That's the challenge with the particular growth that we're having, is that the part for me is the developers kind of tell me one story and then we get to another. What I do know is what is left in town to be developed is minimal in regards to, well, I won't say minimal. There's several fairly large areas that are left to be developed. They're the same areas that were left to be developed when I started. And they were the same areas that were, I heard for 10 years that one site had a development plan that hadn't done anything before I even came. I've been here about 8 years, 9 years now, and they still haven't done anything. And And I've talked to that developer and I don't have a plan coming in at this point. So I'm pretty confident that's not going to happen next year at this point. Things may change, you know. I have a developer that's talking about a project, but there is nothing that's before us today. And he keeps talking, but he's been talking for the last 7 months and I haven't seen anything. So to plan on that would be hard for me to do, but he may come in, and if it does, I'm going to be wrong again next year on our development numbers. Where I am confident, and we have been watching on the ones that are township residents who are doing projects at their houses, we're pretty close on those. Those are pretty common every year. Those are pretty the right amounts. The guy that comes in and, you know, does a house and flips a house kind of thing. We're pretty close on those numbers year after year. Where we miss typically is this new development, and it's hard. I mean, I budgeted for dollars for this year, and then they turned around and, you know, we're over 750 plus more than what I even expected based on where the numbers were. And, you know, then he came back with another piece just recently and pulled more. So I hear what you're saying on that. It is the area where I've struggled the most figuring out how to hit that number pretty close. The other numbers we're, you know, typically pretty close on. I missed interest this year. That I did miss, but that, you know, normally with interest, I'm within, you know, $5,000. That's, you know, kind of depending on where we are cash flow wise. But sometimes it's hard. We've sat here, I'm not the only one that looks at it, and, you know, we come back and we try to get those numbers and we miss them on that one. But that's the harder one, because it's really developer dependent, and we've had just really some significant build outs at different times. And so, you know, I would ask every year what your plans were, and then they do twice what they told me. So, you know, I was told that Lister wouldn't finish until next year originally, and Lister's been done now for about 1.5 years. So, or about a year, I guess. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that it makes it hard on my end to give an exact number of where we're going to be.
No, you shouldn't be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So where's all the money sitting?
So the way
That
we've
way-
handled
Is that
it,
why the interest is so high? Is that why the interest is so high? Because
well, the interest is high, obviously, because we're held in cash. I mean, the two things. When we have a policy that the board has set in place that we maintain 3 months of supply or 3 months of expenses in the general fund. And then anything that's over that 3 months gets moved to the capital fund to address capital needs of the township. The last year, we have not moved money from the general fund, and that's last 2 years, we've not moved the money from the general fund. The board has wanted to keep more money back in the general fund. And so that's one of the reasons why we have more money in the general fund. But typically at this time of the year, I'm making a recommendation that we move monies over to the capital fund if there's any dollars that are there for that purpose that are not that number of 25% of the budget to do that. We have a guaranteed in the capital fund, we must maintain $1 million as an emergency. I say it's guaranteed, it's the policy that we have. Obviously, the board can change that policy. And so any of the money that's been extra has been money that has typically gone over to the capital fund. I've held back some just to make sure on those years that we are paying for inspections the following year. We cover the inspections that were purchased in the year before because that makes sense. It ties the money to the expense. But typically we're moving that over and then it's there. And that's how we've been able to do the things that we've done aggressively in the township of trying to do additional capital projects and why we have some money prepared for when we get the designs done and those kind of things. And that's how we've done that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how we do that.
Well, how much is there?
Which in the capital fund?
Yeah.
Currently, right now, there's about 9 million and there's about $9 million worth of expenses planned.
How about this? As a proposal. You keep the money for the permit department absolutely separate. Don't keep back some of it, future permits. In other words, let's make a separate account that is only for that department,
Okay,
okay? And don't use it,
Treat it as a fund.
yeah, don't treat it as a source of income.
Yeah.
That money should not be used, in my view, and that's up to the Board of Supervisors. I
Right.
recognize this, but it seems shady. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, even though it comes out that way. But it just seems like we're using the permit department to fund other things in the township when that department should be revenue neutral.
Yeah.
Yes?
it's
So why not do that?
a good question. Yeah. I can have that conversation with the board. I mean, but this is how they've moved
No,
forward.
yeah, that's how they operate. I get it.
The other thing oh, sorry, Larry, go ahead. You go first.
Thinking about the budget from Monday night.
Larry, maybe you enlighten for
Oh,
Scott's purpose.
well, the budget initially showed this year was gonna have $1.1 million surplus. Next year's budget was gonna have about $1 million deficit,
Mhm.
right, in gross numbers. And then Steve presented, reduced the deficit, and then the board ended up taking more money from the general fund to balance the budget. But
This is proposed. They
yeah,
still haven't
but looking at
finalized
that
it.
budget a different way. If the $750,000 came in next year, this year's surplus would have been $750,000 less.
Yes,
Next year's deficit would have been $750,000. So in a way, taking the money from the general fund to balance next year's budget is taking some of that $750,000. But we're saying it's the general fund, not income. So what they're doing, they're taking it from the general fund, but it's actually, in a way, it's just moving the money that you thought was going to be next year that came in this year. Does that make sense?
it does.
Yeah, so, yeah, if it came in next year, they might have still had the same tax increase. But they wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have been viewed different than what, because I got up and said, don't take money from the general fund. But then when I got home, I said, well, no, you can almost say they're just taking it from last year's revenue that we thought was going to be this year's revenue.
I mean, I will tell you, my direction has always been, and those who know me know that financially I lean on the very conservative side. I think we should do everything that the community wants to do if we have the funding to do it and do that. But on the same time, I look at things very clearly, what are revenues that are what I consider non-reoccurring versus revenues that are reoccurring. And the challenge that I've had is we've had revenues that I've thought would be non-reoccurring more often and have become reoccurring. And so I'm having to work through that. And that's the challenge that the board and I go through every year in looking at this.
Dave, if I could stop you there. One of the things I was thinking about with the surplus that's sitting there
Mhm.
is if you look back a number of years, how much revenue did the township generate from what I would really consider to be the prize large items, particularly transfer tax, some of these very large parcels
Yeah.
that moved over, as compared to building, permitting, because you'd say, okay, if we're gonna do 50 houses versus we're gonna do one house, you can, where do you draw the line on what's recurring and what's extraordinary? But how much do you know, how much has came in as a result of the large transfers as compared to the single family residence that's small business?
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me off the top of my head, my number is going to be a total guess. If you're asking me to do the research, I can do the research and get
I
back
don't
to
want
you.
to put work on you, but
I
I think that
would-
number, people are gonna want to ask about that number.
I mean, I think I could clearly remember some numbers that are probably pushing over 1 million, without doing much work in my brain. Like I can list off in my brain,
Top of your head.
the top of my head, the transfer of mainline health.
Right, that's what I was getting at.
We had no idea it was going to happen, nor did we have any idea about what it was. There was a large transfer that happened over, and I had just met with Brandywine literally 6 months before they sold it, and they told me that they were happy being in the township. And next thing I know, Henderson was buying their property. The ads, what's now, I forget what their title is now, but those apartments have actually flipped, I think 2 or 3 times in my time here at the township of who's the owner.
But it's not of the order, I was thinking more it was of the order of 2, 3, 4 million. Because when you look at that surplus, is it really being driven by a big percentage of it being?
I will tell you, I can tell you, like I can go back each year and tell you where it's from. It is across multiple areas. It's not all one area. There have been several years where the county gave me a number in November, and then the number we had in January when we went out to do taxes was different. And it generated, that's happened almost every year. It's happened to some extent. Some years it's been up, some years it's been down. And a couple years it was significantly up. And so those years we've ended up with a much greater number in that area than what we thought we were going to end up, in real estate tax collection. And I can show you the number I received on November 15th, and that was the number that we worked with and then turned around, and we'll do that. We'll get the number this week. That's one of the challenges. I don't get that number until now. I'll get that number and I'll make an adjustment, and then I'll tell the board that I've made that adjustment based on that number. And then January, it's different again. And I think they're getting better since they did the reassessment. And the other thing that's happened that has impacted us is there have been several large reassessments that were done mid-year that really did drive like $100,000 in any one given year. And you have that happen a couple of years in a row, and that adds up, as additionals too. So it's not any one thing, but there's lots of things. And
It's just seemed directionally they're coming our way.
Well, and I will tell you, I did this for 10.
Anticipate it.
I did 10 years in Phoenixville, and as the finance person, and I was typically within $100,000 to $200,000 on the budget every year. I mean, so for me here, this is like I haven't quite. There's so many additional moving parts because of all the things that are going on. It's been really hard to hit.
So that raises a question. Are we typical of townships in this area in that we have the surplus every year of such an extraordinary amount? Is that normal
I think it depends on the township. I mean, some townships have a lot
every year?
every year, and other townships are you know, every year kind of hitting on the other side. So, it's,
Personally, you know, again, I'm not running for anything. I'm just, you know, as a taxpayer, I wouldn't have any problem with us having $9 million in the capital fund if the taxpayers had been told up front, okay, this year we expect to have a surplus of X and we're building in a savings.
Yeah.
Instead, it seems like we go to super conservative accounting principles and skim off every year. You know, we charge more in taxes than we need to, and then skim off the excess into the fund. And the taxpayers never really told that this is what's going on. In other words, they're told, oh, we're budgeting X for the police and Y for the this, but we didn't spend that much. So now we're not going to return it to you, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer. We're going to put it into a fund for later use. It seems that that's not in the spirit of transparency that I personally would like to see. If it happened once or twice, you know, a couple of years in a row, no big deal. But for 10 years, rather than celebrate it almost raises a red flag of, are we slowly overcharging the taxpayer over time to put stuff, you know, it's not like the money's going in anybody's pocket, but we're not telling them exactly how we're raising the money that we're using to do projects. Does that make sense? And
I hear what you're saying, and that makes sense. I'm more than happy to sit down with any one of you and go through what we go through, and look how we get where we are. I'm willing to take suggestions on how to do it differently. When I talk about the things we don't spend, you know, when we budget for what we think we're going to do in the year. And we try to budget for those things. You know, I don't know how many sewer repairs I'm going to do in the year, storm sewer repairs, but I have to budget something because typically I know we have some. Some years we have none. Some years we have a lot. And so it's always, you know, I try to take and look at what we've done over a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year period and say, what's the average? And that's what we should budget. And that's where we should kind of hold on those kind of things. On others, and that's how, like, when we look at salt, you know, like, what's that right number? Because some things are not some things are, we just don't know now where we're going to be next year. And look, I've been places where everybody in December goes and spends every last dime that they have so that their budget dollars are all spent. And I've seen places that do that, and I've like, well, that doesn't seem realistic to me either. We're not when you budget it for this and then all of a sudden you're spending it for that, you know, because all of a sudden there's dollars left and you just want to hit a number. And yet, you know, we've had years that, you know, in COVID is a perfect example that we managed, like we stopped all spending at one point, you know, and so we were way over on our budget to what we actually spent because we just made major changes. I've had a position in the budget for 3 years that I wanted to fill. And I took it out this year going into 2024, the custodial position, because every time I've gone out for applications, I've either gotten none or I've gotten applications that I couldn't use. I still think we need the custodian. It hasn't changed my opinion. I just haven't found a valid person to do it. But there's $100,000 that I haven't spent 3 years in a row, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't find the right person to do the job.
Couldn't find the right person at that salary. If you pay more salary, right? We talked about this.
Yeah,
Job.
I mean, I have a salary of $54,000 for a custodian. I think that's a pretty reasonable salary for that position.
But if you're not getting people applying for it, or the right people, then
Let me tell you, maybe you're right, you know, I mean, obviously. But do you overpay because I don't know.
well, if it's a competitive market, you have to pay the market rate.
Let me just say that I know what places around us are paying for that service. The school district is paying less than that and have custodians working for them.
Why?
Tell me why. I don't know.
Better benefits over there?
Maybe a little bit better benefits, but I think our benefits are pretty good. Yeah, I mean, when you come to work for the township, if you're we pay 100% of your health insurance for you. And I think is it 12% for the family? 12.5 that the employee pays for their family. I mean, I think we've got really good benefits. We've got a nice pension plan. I don't know why. I mean, and maybe, we could debate that, but what I can tell you is it's not like I didn't check around to see what other places were doing and talk to other municipalities and talk to other places. But I hear you. So anyway, I think, I'll continue to answer any
Anybody
questions.
wants to raise on this in terms of this particular topic?
Yeah, next month I'll do it, so you don't have to do it, but I'd like over the last 10 years, see what in the codes department, what their expenses were versus what the revenue is, how much total. I'd be curious to see how much of the 9 million we have is because of the codes, but maybe it's time to start talking about dropping all those fees.
Okay.
Or putting a hiatus on them for a few years. It just irks me that the codes department, I know it does you guys too, but it irks me that that's a revenue generating source. Which would be fine if we advertised it as such.
Yeah.
But we don't. We say, oh no, it's supposed to be
Yeah,
revenue.
recurring
neutral.
versus non-recurring.
Again, this is
gets
it's a communication
it gets
issue.
clouded when it happens that many years.
Yeah. I'll put that chart to.
I'd like to make a suggestion that any work that's done on that be before it's presented with questions publicly, that it's reviewed with Steve and Vaughn before it gets to the meeting, because I think it's important for you to work with them to come up with actual numbers rather than come up with your numbers and question them.
I got you. It's the same thing that I would present as a member of the public at any meeting.
Right, but you're a member of the
I got
finance
you,
committee.
but I would pull it from the audit.
Right, but again,
There's a revenue and an
what
expense.
I'm suggesting is before you say, I pulled these are the truth, just get the context from Steve before you present them publicly.
I hear you. I would never say these are the truth. I would say these are documents numbers I pulled from audited financial statements, and I'll cite them appropriately. I
Right,
hear you.
but again, talk to Steve first so that you know that those numbers
Are correct.
are correct.
All right. Yeah, that's fine.
And the one thing I remember you saying, Steve, you said you have $9 million in the bank, but you have $9 million of projects. So, not like that money's sitting. It's gonna be used for, and I guess that's the idea. What are those projects?
I mean, look, as a taxpayer in the community, and I don't ever believe it's the township's role to just accumulate money. That's not, the idea is to have funding to take care of the expenses that are before the community. That's the long term. I hear exactly what's being said. I think we can do a better job in being transparent where we are, and we'll work together and we'll do that. And so, but today I will tell you that even though we have some dollars in the bank, we could easily spend every dollar on what needs to be done. And I'm trying to move forward.
Stormwater.
I'm trying to move forward on as many of those as we possibly can. I had 3 projects that I thought for sure were going to be done this year without a question, and all 3 didn't get done. And I had 2 projects that I thought we were going to be completed that started this year, and both projects look like they're going to run into next year. And that doesn't even count the projects that we didn't even get to because we just don't have the resources right now to do them all. And that's not money. We have money sitting there. I just don't have, the engineers don't have the bandwidth. The staff doesn't have the bandwidth to take on more projects than we can do in one time, and so.
Take your time doing it.
This may or may not, doesn't have to involve conversation today. Question, I'm on the board of a nonprofit that, a foundation that 2023 found itself with generating significant interest
Yes.
that it hadn't anticipated. And we had a deep discussion at our foundation meeting last month about what that interest gets you. Because it wasn't apparent to everyone on the board that under GAAP, that those funds that were generated from project sources would go into the general fund, to our endowment, rather than project fund for the fund generated.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. And so we do an allocation. So poor Yvonne's had to learn how we do this because it's like this big pot. And so when we have a checking account that we use to manage about 5 of our funds. And it's the capital fund, it's the general fund, and that. But as the revenues, we go back and every month look at what the dollars are that were in each of those funds as part of where that is. So if you have, let's say we have 16 million in the checking account, so to speak, and we have dollars that, a third of it is general fund, a third of it's capital fund, and then the rest of it's made up with 3 or 4 other funds. And that's not the right percentages. I'm just throwing it out there. Then we do an allocation. A third of the interest goes to, and it's based on what the actual numbers are. Whatever the number is, that's the number we use for each one of those areas. And so when we did that allocation, those that are project dollars got put into project areas. Those that are, like, for example, I think one of the funds is the environmental fund. I forget what it's called right now, but the one that where people, if the developer does certain things and they have to give a fee, that goes into a certain fund for it's the open space fund. There's dollars there, whatever those dollars generated. If it had been in a separate account, that's what gets applied to that account, so that each area is getting the dollars that are the dollars that belong to that area. So when I talk about the $170,000 that I hadn't counted on in the general fund, or in the, for the budget, it is the general funds portion of that money. It is not and that was one of the reasons we hadn't done the allocation yet, because Yvonne and I were working on a lot of other things, trying to get things up. Allocation's a relatively easy entry, but I had kind of waited to do that. We didn't do that allocation until September. When we did that allocation, I had a clear picture of where that was going to be. And I had not been really counting on that until I saw where it went. And then all of a sudden I went, well, that's still significant money. And so we looked at it and I said, wow. And so we do have some dollars there that we can count on for 2024. I don't think interest rates are going to stay high forever. And so, at some point that's going to go back down and we'll have to watch that. And so, but does that answer your question? Okay, yeah, we watch that pretty closely. And we have that even with involving all of our funds, like we watch that and we allocate, even if it's in another area, and we do the same thing. I do the same thing in the municipal authority.
Okay, we're on to old business. 7.1, our flood control. We did the presentation at the board meeting Monday evening. They understood it. They got the written communication in advance. There was recognition of the issue. By who? I think they recognized the issue. They did not engage in discussion. Or did not engage in discussion with respect to what was presented. I believe it's pretty obvious that the budget deficit for the current year consumed the bandwidth about revenue generation and tax increase. So as I thought about it after Alex and I texted back and forth, we could speculate on a lot of different things going on. In running it forward, if there's whatever the number is, $8 million in capital and allocated towards various future projects, the decisions regarding those monies and where they ultimately are devoted gives the board a little bit of wiggle room. They have ARPA money left for 2024. And they've clearly deferred a decision on this for a year. But they know it's looming. So either they're going to have to decide, is this going to be funded through surplus or is it going to be funded through fee tax, whatever you want to call it, or some combination thereof. But clearly they've deferred for a year. I would be surprised if they did not come back at some point in the middle of the year and re-engage on this topic, because they know it's not going away. They also know we're one failure, major failure away from it rising to the top of the heap. So that's kind of my synopsis of what happened on. Alex, any comments?
I disagree with it. I just don't think that they can engage. I won't be surprised if they don't engage at all on it. There seems to have been some huge miscommunication. And I don't know where it happened, but we were under the impression that this was an urgent need, had to get done, had to change our committee meeting to get it done, get it on, so that they could make some decision for next year on, whether they were going to implement it or not, or how much, if they were going to do that. Not that they had to take our recommendation, I don't care one way or the other. But there was no, it bothered me, I guess, that there was no engagement at all on the issue after creating a fire drill. And I tried to bring that point up when I went to the podium and said, hey, this is a friggin' emergency, apparently, because we were told to get on it right away and nobody cares. I was also surprised. I don't know. When you rank those projects according to their severity, I forget coding that you use in your budget, like capital, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where would the flood be? That would have been like the highest level.
That would have been an A.
But it wasn't even in your presentation, which also surprised me. Like, why?
Because that whole piece actually has been kind of, and I hear what you're saying, and so that whole piece had been pulled out, kind of as a separate project from the other capital pieces.
Because of the ARPA money?
Huh?
Because of the ARPA money?
Partly because of the ARPA money, but even before.
Oh.
Apologize. I thought I'd turn that off. The capital or stormwater had been pulled kind of aside and said, we're going to treat that as a separate piece. And how we try to address this. Other than when the ARPA monies came in, we did say, and we put there, and I think that drove it. But I think the other thing that has happened in the process is, as you know, this committee's probably looked at this stormwater for probably 18 months, almost a year, or almost 2 years. And there has, and I don't want to, I'm going to say this, and we're going to turn around and be in a whole different place within a couple of weeks, potentially, or at least this winter. We have not had overly severe storms the last probably 10 months or so. And I'm going to say what's out of sight gets out of mind. I mean, I think as staff, we've continued to say, we know this isn't going anywhere. But to be honest with you, my stormwater complaints over the last probably 10 months, maybe even a little longer, have almost been non-existent. And I think that, you know, when things like that go away, it over time loses its urgency in people's minds, if that's a fair thing to say. We as staff talk about it still every week. George and I are talking about what needs to be done and moving this forward, because we know that we are literally one storm away from it being front and center again. And so that's what my guess is. Huh?
They're rolling the dice.
And I think that I'm going to need to frame it differently for them again and put it back before where we need to be. And
Yeah, without begging for a catastrophe.
Yeah, I mean, look, we haven't changed anything. You know, the issues that we were talking about are still there. They just haven't been as prevalent because we haven't had those significant events, fortunately, for a period of time that have allowed us to be there. We've had some good rains this year, but they have not been those deluges that we experienced back to back to back that were setting things up. It's probably been 2.5 years since we've had that kind of thing where I was looking at a flooding event probably every 6 weeks, kind of thing.
There was a comment made after the meeting by a supervisor that, well, if we needed to, we'll just fund the bond issue. That's how that'll happen. But that fails to recognize that that bond issue,
As a
debt
payment,
service on that is going to be significant.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, just raising $1 million on a $10 million budget, we have, you know, $1 million of debt service on a $10 or $11 million is a significant hit. So I am not disappointed that they didn't choose to implement the plan or amend it in any way. I was utterly confused as to why there was absolutely no discussion of it at all. But instead, there was a celebration of how much money we had in the capital account. There was a long discussion about how awesome the township is that it managed to funnel secretly all this money, this $9 million, and how great township is financially. You know, and I felt then compelled to get up and say, but you got this massive project staring you in the face. And the response is basically, whatever, not that big a deal.
I'd agree with your assessment that they listened and kind of nodded their heads and thank you. Not sure, it may be 6 months, it will come up again, but maybe not. But taking what you said, you know, if they wanted to do a bond issue, you probably could do that before you could design the work that really needs to be done. That's
How much do you need?
I mean,
well, I
it's
think
really,
that
raising the money might be the easier part than figuring out, okay, here's this first $8 million worth of work. when can I get a contractor in there?
Well,
Absolutely
well,
right. In the,
yeah,
in
well-
the school district, you know what they do when they know they've got a big project coming down the pike? They start building in the debt service for it into the budget a couple years in advance. So
This-
that it's the debt service line item increases over time, even though they're not spending it. And, you know, that hasn't been done either.
Where the biggest failure was Monday night was what I expected was Leonard, one of the other supervisors, direct the engineer, update and prioritize the Stantex November 1, 2021 estimate. So they have up-to-date real numbers adjusted for inflation. So they know
Here's what
here it is.
yeah, and I will say this, probably hindsight's always 20/20. If I play Monday morning quarterback, I would never have allowed you to present on the night that I presented the budget. Because I will tell you, no, and let me tell you why. Their mind that night was, what are we gonna do with the budget now? And not looking at this almost needs its own attention. I don't want to say on its own night, but it needs to come back in and be looked at when they're not having to think about where we are with the budget.
Not your
And
fault, Mr. Neese. It was on the schedule for a meeting before the budget meeting.
I
which was the
understand.
appropriate place, but it was pushed off so that there could be appropriate consideration and discussion, which there turned out to be none.
I agree.
So that's sort of what infuriates a few of us up here.
And and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying, I mean, going and looking at it, putting the two together, I knew going into that night, the focus was going to change when I started getting closer, because I knew the kind of conversations I was having with the individual board members before the night, and their focus was, what are we doing about the budget? And so everything, it just didn't give it.
Not your,
No, well, I mean, it's like, I have to, it's my job to manage those kind of things.
Thinking about the $8 million, whatever, that's in the general fund now.
Yep.
Would you say there's capital? No, the general fund, not the capital fund.
There's about 8 in the general fund.
I would think there's $1 million in that. That's not encumbered in any way. It's not.
That's fair.
That could be used for the initial phase, while they finalize how to start raising money. And to me, that might be a good use. It's one-time expense. It's not.
Right.
The recurring expense is going to be paid for by the whatever
Revenue source.
fundraising. So if they really were serious, as a taxpayer, to me, that might be a good use of money that you've saved in the past. You know, here, Mr. Engineer, here's $300,000. Go design these projects.
Give me a hard cost.
As opposed for having to start the new fundraising. That way you could start it next year and really figure out, okay, in 2025, we're going to have a revenue stream to keep paying that bond issue. And you wouldn't, that gives you 2 years, a year, then you do your bond issue and with your revenue.
Yeah, here's what I would say about bond issue. I think somebody asked the question about the bond issue. Typically, you don't go out for a bond issue until you're pretty sure what you anticipate your expense is going to be, for a couple reasons. If you want to do tax exempt bonds, which is what most municipalities want to do, you want to make sure that you're going to spend the bond dollars that you're going to spend, because if you're not spending them and they're just invested, there's implications that you could make the entire bond series or make it taxable. And so, people buy municipal bonds because they're non-taxable. And so, that's one of the reasons why people invest in those. And so we want to make sure that we do everything that we've got set up in that to do that. And secondly, what I'm finding is estimates that we are getting today for projects are double and triple what they were 3 years ago. And we need to not only make sure that's true, because I don't want to go get a bond issue for 10 million to do what I think is 8, but a building in contingency and find out it's 20. If you understand where it's headed. And so we really do need to do enough design and then do some, what we call, like, we'll do some bidding without going out to official bid, like to have some people give us some numbers. They'll look at the project and say, yeah, I think you're about X, so that we have a really good number before we go out. I know that's what, when John was on the municipal authority, that's what we did at the municipal authority before we went out. And we were really pretty close to that 33 million number to build it out. I think it's going to cost us about, 800,000 more or something like that. But that you really don't want extra money on the bond as much as
You don't
possible.
want a shortfall or an overage. You want to get it close.
You want to get it
Right
really,
now,
really,
they don't
really
have the
close.
information, even know what that number.
Yeah, right now I wouldn't, if they
Couldn't
told
even
me,
move.
I would say today, you don't have enough information to make that decision.
Right.
This was such an unusual event.
Well, it was we were experiencing it for like a 3 or 4 year period, that it was just constant that we were doing this.
So now it's
And over the last 18 months, we've had rains, but they haven't been those significant, really heavy in the moment. I mean, we've had a couple, but they didn't last long. We had a storm that came through, I think it was maybe it was in May or June. That was one of those that they said it was raining at, like 12 inches an hour or something like that. It was some real ridiculous number, but it lasted 20 minutes, it was very, very quick. What was happening in the past is we were having that on one day, turning around and having it on another day, turning around and having it the day after, and the systems couldn't recover in that period of time. And so we had stream levels that were really high, and we had a lot of issues that were happening, and it was very clear there was a lot of washout in areas. We were really having to address a lot of problems throughout. What's interesting to me is just this week, and we've had one of our driest spells that I've had, that I can remember. I've had 2 different groups reach out to me related to the stormwater issues that we've been talking about, because they're concerned, because what they're hearing about the potential wet winter we're going to have, what that impact is going to be. And so I'm going to be meeting with them again. So I do think, it's one of those things that it can be cyclical. Do I think it's changed forever? I don't. I think we're going to go back to more of the other. But
Why do you think that?
huh? Because what our cycles have shown me that over the last decade or couple decades, we're having more of those events. I don't see anything showing that we're not going to. The meteorologists predicted that this was going to be a dry spell and that we're coming back. I don't have any reason to believe it's not going to happen. And so, whether you call it global warming or whether you call it something else, that's the reality of what we're living in. It doesn't change the fact that those projects need to be addressed for when they do happen, so that we don't have those kind of significant.
The other issue was the highlight was the failure in the Valley Forge Road Bridge. That got a lot of attention. I think that also.
Yeah, but I will say that had nothing to do with rain.
Oh,
The failure of that bridge had to do with the fact
the
that,
stage,
huh?
the stage.
No, the failure of that, that bridge had to do with a aqua line that burst, that actually caused an additional amount of water to come through. It was an age issue, but what precipitated it was not a rain event, was a flooding event caused by a meter burst.
Any other questions on 7.1? 7.2, I just put this in because I don't know whether or not this was a topic that's been completed. I don't know if there's any further discussion regarding review of vendor contracts, so I just put it in just to, oh, we're good?
Do we need to do I think we've gotten you most of them, but,
Eric, yep,
huh?
yes,
Okay,
I mean, there's nothing more we need to do.
okay.
Good. All right, take it off. Public comment, I see no one in the room. Are there any other items of new business for consideration for the next meeting? I hear none. We are adjourned.